Right. Welcome, everyone. We'll wait for a few more to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is a continuation of the webinar series on the global benchmarking study that looked at pedestrian safety on urban arterials and sharing some lessons from New Zealand and Australia. So we're glad that you've joined us. Hopefully, you've attended parts 1 and 2, but if not, welcome. We're going to get into some discussion today about road safety audits, and specifically how we can take this concept, which you all may know a lot about, and kind of look at it through a safe system lens, and maybe mimic and take lessons from those who we learned from, and mimic that approach here in the United States. So we've got a great panel lined up for you to talk about their work on this topic, and I'd like to go ahead and introduce you to them now. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get right into the presentations. So first, we're joined today by Rachel Carpenter, who was appointed as the California Department of Transportation's first ever Chief Safety Officer, effective January 2020. She's Caltrans' highest level subject matter expert on safety practices and policies, and manages the day-to-day operations of the newly established Division of Safety Programs. We're also joined by Tamara Redman, who is the Pedestrian and Bicyclist Safety Program Manager in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety. She's managed the program for 23 years and develops tools, guides, and technology that help practitioners improve pedestrian and bicyclist safety. Recent accomplishments include the completion of guides on improving safety for pedestrians and bicyclists accessing transit, and improving pedestrian safety on urban arterials, learning from Australasia, what we're here to talk about today. Becky Crow is with us as well. Becky has worked for the Federal Highway Administration for over 20 years. She came to the Office of Safety in 2005 and has managed multiple safety programs, including road safety audits, motorcycle, older drivers, and several everyday counts innovations, including road diets and safe transportation for every pedestrian. We have two panelists from two different states here to share their stories as well. We'll hear from Anna Phil, who is a highway safety engineer at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation with over 25 years of experience in the transportation field. In her role at MassDOT, Ms. Phil manages the Road Safety Audit Program, oversees safety analysis using the Highway Safety Manual and other safety methods, assists with the development and implementation of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan, among many other tasks. So we're glad that Anna's here to join us today. And finally, Brandon Darks, who's the manager of the Tennessee DOT's Project Safety Office, has 24 years of experience with TDOT in transportation planning, engineering, and safety studies. The Project Safety Office role is responsible for the coordination, development, and management of all safety projects identified in the Highway Safety Improvement Program within Tennessee's Strategic Highway Safety Plan. So again, a great group of panelists. They've got a lot of great information to share with you. I will only spend a little more time with you to share some housekeeping and let you know that as attendees today, you don't have the ability to speak, but you do have the ability to send us questions and comments along the way using the comments or questions pane in Zoom webinars. So I hope you'll do that. We have about 30 minutes or so set aside at the end for Q&A and discussion with our panelists. So feel free to send those questions in whenever you have them. We are going to be archiving this webinar. We've already archived the other 2 episodes in the series. We'll be recording today's session. We've posted a copy of the slides to our website. I'll share links to all this information in just a moment through the chat, but just know that you will be able to follow up and look back at any of the information we shared today. You're going to get an email later today or early tomorrow with information about this webinar, about the links we discussed, the webinar archive and recording. And we're also going to share a link to a post-webinar survey that you can use to generate your certificate of attendance for the webinar today. I do encourage you to review those previous sessions if you're new to this series or new to our webinars in general. This slide shows you the part 1 session and the part 2 sessions that we had on the overview of the findings, and then the movement in place framework at the end of September and beginning of this month. We're now shifting to part 3, again, the discussion of road safety audits, and we'll have one more episode on November 7th after this one to focus on speed management practices. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our next group of panelists. Rachel Carpenter will kick us off, and Tamara, go ahead and share your screen whenever you are ready.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, and it is really a pleasure to be with all of you today. As Dan said, my name is Rachel Carpenter. I'm with the California Department of Transportation, and I was so fortunate to be able to participate in this study tour. So it looks like I'm seeing the slides, but they're not in slide mode, presentation mode.
And we might see your other screen, Tamara. I'm not sure if you could start the presentation.
And I think while she's doing that, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. So I know we've had 2 previous webinars. I'm going to be sharing a bit more information on road safety audits specifically. So I won't be going into detail on our study and intro or overview because we did already do that. So I'll just jump in here, and it looks like we're seeing the slides and they look great, Tamara. So next slide. Great. So this is just a reminder. This is the folks who participated in the study and whom you'll hear from over the course of this webinar series. Next. So as we discussed in the first webinar of the series, we often know what to do to prevent PED fatalities on urban arterials. So the issue is not so much what, it's how to get it done and how to get it done across the whole system and not on a case-by-case study. So just to recap, we know the what. It's reducing vehicle speed to manage kinetic energy using geometric design and operational strategies, including emerging technologies like camera enforcement. We know that we want to separate vulnerable road users from motorized vehicles in time and space, especially when vehicle speeds exceed survivable levels. And third, we want to design roads and streets to suit their desired context, considering future land use, as well as economic, climate, public health, and equity goals. So the answer, we're not really looking at what we need to do, it's how we get it done. And that answer, requires us to look upstream from countermeasures and find opportunities really to change the fundamental way of doing business when we design and deliver projects. Perfect. So we can stay on this slide. So also just want to recap another theme we discussed in previous webinars that's really, I think, worth repeating here is this concept that we need to be more proactive and take an interdisciplinary approach. So as we discuss the Australasian approach to road safety audits, I think you'll see that those 2 principles are really clearly demonstrated in their approach. Next slide. All right, so in the first webinar in the series, we showed this slide and discussed how road safety audits were a key tool to deliver safety policy in a systematic, multidisciplinary, and holistic way. And as you'll hear later today in the presentation from Federal Highway, this practice is in contrast to what we're seeing in the US right now. I know at the department here at Caltrans, we take much more of a reactive approach after a facility has already experienced a crash problem before we introduce a road safety audit. So it's, we think this is a real opportunity to strengthen our approach here in the States. Next. All right, so as we get into the conversation today, I want to just do a little level setting about what we mean when we say road safety audit. So this is a definition from IRAP. A road safety audit is a systematic method of checking the safety aspects of new road improvement schemes. The term is generally considered to refer to a formal, independent, and multidisciplinary detailed assessment of the safety performance of all new highway and traffic management schemes, including modifications to existing layouts, and are undertaken at different stages during the design, planning, and construction process. I want to just highlight the independent and multidisciplinary component of this definition that you see in bold. And in particular, one of my biggest takeaways was really this independent nature of road safety audits. So I think here in the States, at least I can speak for California, often RSAs have become sort of this community engagement activity. But what we saw in Australasia is that road safety audits really are this independent check by a small expert team. And so as we go through different practices from different places in Australasia and the US, let's keep this definition in mind and see how the definition and approach may differ to what we do here. Next slide. So I share this slide really just to provide an overview of the way in which New Zealand has been institutionalizing its road safety audit process in a holistic and upstream way as part of their long-time commitment to the safe system approach. So the Waka Kotahi investment policy specifies that a safe system audit is undertaken at key stages of a project's development and implementation stage. So at stage 1, which is sort of scheme or concept development, at stage 2, which is the preliminary design stage, at stage 3, which is detailed design, and at stage 4, which is pre-opening or post-construction stage. And I think the beauty of this process is really that they've integrated this safety check as the project is going through its life cycle. And what that does then, it gives the opportunity to make sure that any chance to implement safety improvements is taken as the project develops. So these stages, though, we did learn they weren't rigid, as all projects aren't the same and will not always follow the development stages, that were described, that I just described, those 4 stages. But the stages of a safe system audit really should match the project's complexity and actual development stages. So I think one of the larger takeaways is that there's not a lot of rigidity in most of what's done. It's sort of, engineers who have very deep understanding and then can morph a process as it makes sense to whatever they're, doing at the time. So here for a road safety audit. The earlier another takeaway was, though, that the earlier a road safety audit or safe system audit is undertaken, the easier and less expensive it is to make changes to the project. So a safe system audit only at the post-construction stage really should be avoided at all costs, because it's too late at that point to make significant improvements, if any are required. So desirably, a post-construction safe system audit should be undertaken before opening the project for public use. And if in practice it isn't possible, then the safe system audit should be undertaken as soon after opening as possible. So that will really ensure that there's no additional improvements that can be made. Next slide. So the New Zealand approach, in addition to laying out a specific process, like I just discussed, also aims really to define roles for different multidisciplinary team members and ensures that the team has the subject matter expertise and the capacity needed. So their approach also recommends that each road controlling authority embed the requirements of safe system audits into appropriate policy documents. That's including, asset plans, safety management systems, and development codes. Next. So what we saw in New Zealand mirrored what we heard in Australia as well. So AUSTROS publishes, AUSTROS is sort of the equivalent of the Transportation Research Board here in the States. And what they do is they publish a guide to road safety series, and it's a collection of policy guidance resources. The AUSTROS resource managing road safety audits provides really this comprehensive review of approaches to implementing road safety analyses throughout planning, design, implementation, and the operational life cycle of transportation projects and programs. So anybody can go onto AUSTROS website and sign up for a login and get access to this wealth of information. So I'd highly recommend you do that if you don't already have access to AUSTROS. Next. So importantly, RSAs give agencies an opportunity to define safety and identify factors that affect safety. So in the US, we often rely too heavily on using crash data to define a safety problem. But we have to remember that the absence of crashes is not the presence of safety. In fact, more than half of all ped and bike injuries are never reported in police crash data sets. So under the safe system approach that's used in Australasia, they're clear that transportation injuries are a result of exposure to a risk or harmful source, multiplied, like you see here in the slide, by the likelihood of an event and the severity of the energy force at impact. And they aim to reduce those factors regardless of whether a crash has already happened or not. So as we heard at last week's AASHTO Safety Summit, which I hope some of you have been were able to join, AASHTO is working on a strategic safety plan that's looking to build in this definition of safety and hopefully move us closer towards the progress of proactively preventing roadway injuries that the safe system that we know safe system nations are already making. Next. So the RSA process is a key opportunity to define those injury predictors as well as link them to treatments that would reduce the influence of exposure, likelihood, or severity. And that's what you sort of see here laid out on the slide. So there was a lot of useful information in Australia and New Zealand approaches to road safety audits that I hope can be further, so let's see, slide 12, please. Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Cameron. That I hope really can be further integrated into the US. And I'm going to share a couple of slides on how sort of the work that we're doing in California on approaching road safety audits. And later in this webinar, you'll also hear from Anna Phil with MassDOT and Brandon Darks with the Tennessee Department of Transportation about their efforts that are underway. So at Caltrans, we are collaborating with other functional areas across our department and all of our 12 district offices to develop a road safety audit pilot program. And we're aiming to release a draft of this program in the next year or so. And really what the pilot program will do is to include a project screening and funding mechanism for our practitioners across the state to undertake road safety audits. So what you see in this on the sort of the worm looking graphic is just the 8-step RSA process as defined by federal highway. And we think that it's a really good one, so we're going to stick with that. What you see is sort of listed on the left are the steps that we're taking. So like I said, we're in the process of developing this pilot program. And really our intent is to develop a uniform statewide practice and move away from that sort of stakeholder engagement activity. So we're at this point exploring project screening and funding mechanisms, but our intent really is to develop that process and funding streams so that we can more regularly complete RSAs in line with what we learned in Australasia. Federal Highway acknowledges that this process of RSAs is, if you could go back, is really a proactive and cross-cutting proven safety countermeasure. And so you can see the crash reduction rate between 10 and 60% here. And we just know that there's not enough RSAs being done. So we're really trying to improve our own our process at Caltrans. The last thing I want to add here is that we are in the process of trying to develop a training and certification program for road safety auditors. So one of the things that we learned is that in Australasia, the road safety auditors actually go through this very intensive training program. And they become certified auditors. And so we are trying to develop that same sort of certification process here in California. Okay, next slide. So I just want to show a little bit of sort of what we're, an example from one of our district offices that recently conducted a road safety audit. And I think that this really shows the power of road safety audits, even if it isn't fully to the extent that an RSA is having built into the life cycle. So our District 3 office, which covers Sacramento and Tahoe in California, if you're familiar with our state, had initially developed a $70 million project to address a high concentration of lane departure crashes along one of our state routes, State Route 20 through Colusa County. And the original scope of the project included the installation of a narrow paved shoulder along 3 miles of the corridor. And the high cost was due to extremely challenging terrain and a lot of right-of-way work that needed to be done. So a couple of years ago, our funding body, the California Transportation Commission, started raising some concerns with the scope of the project. And so what we did was that we undertook a road safety audit, and granted, our audit was, larger than I think what we want to be with fully independent experts, but we did conduct an RSA along this corridor and surrounding sections of the highway in the audit. And we put together, a multidisciplinary team and audited about 22-mile segment of this corridor. And the audit team made several recommendations for short-term, medium-term, and long-term enhancements. And based on the findings of our RSA, our district revised the original scope of the project. So recall that one that I mentioned was $70,000, and they decided to reduce the scope of narrowing shoulders to just about a 1 mile segment that experienced fatal crashes. So that's that focus on fatal and serious. That's key to the safe system approach. But also they included other low cost improvements to the rest of the corridor. And those low cost improvements included rumble strips and signing and striping, sort of enhanced signing and striping. And the revised project was a third of the cost of the project, not even $30 million. And so I think that what this does is really shows that when you focus on fatal and serious injuries, and when you take a second look at a project through an audit, there's a lot of opportunities maybe to make sure that you're installing the most effective countermeasures at the appropriate places. So I'm happy to report that we got funding approval, and now this project is moving forward, and it's going to save the state, significant amount of money, almost $50 million by just focusing on low cost, proven effective countermeasures. And so with that, that was a real high level overview of road safety audits and some of our learnings from Australasia and some examples of what we're doing in California. So I do want to turn it over to Tamara to continue with the webinar. Tamara?
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of the current state of road safety audits in the United States and where we hope to go. So as Rachel mentioned in her presentation, road safety audits are a proven safety countermeasure, and on projects that have had a road safety audit and had the changes implemented or the recommendations implemented, they demonstrated a 10 to 60% reduction in total crashes. RSAs are not new. They were adopted in the United States in the late 1990s because of a previous global benchmarking scan. There is a current NCHRP synthesis project on DOT practices on road safety audits that's in the draft stages. That has, gives an overview, a pretty in-depth overview of which states use road safety audits and how they incorporate those practices into use in their states. And then there's also an NCHRP project that is, I believe, supposed to start next year that covers incorporating the safe system approach into road safety audits. So our goal that we established from our global benchmarking study tour was that we would like road safety audits to be conducted through the life cycle of a project like they are in Australia and New Zealand. We hope to advance the integration of roundabouts into new projects. One thing, there's a couple of recommendations and goals that we have. One of those is developing a roadmap and other resources to advance road safety audits. So basically, a document telling us, taking the state of the practice into account and showing us where we might go in the future in order to reach the goal that we've established. And as mentioned, there was also the recommendation to undertake a synthesis, but as I mentioned in the previous slide, there's already an NCHRP project that's doing that. So once that information is available, we can take it and have a starting point. And Becky Crow is going to talk next. She is our road safety audit expert in the Office of Safety. So, Becky.
Thanks, Tamara. So welcome, everybody. You've heard several times that road safety audits actually started with a scan. And it feels like we've gone almost full circle here now with another scan. So we have done a lot of great activities through our road safety audit program at Federal Highway Administration. I wanted to show just a few of these on the slide. We have a lot of information on our website, and hopefully we can, it looks like that's been put in the chat. I really encourage everybody to look at that website, because from case studies to guidelines to, you can go back. I'm still going down the road, Tamara, to peer exchanges. We've got videos. So anything that you really are looking for, we have on our website. We have a model policy. So if you're interested in developing, Rachel actually mentioned that they're looking at developing a policy. We have developed a model policy that you could use if you're interested in incorporating road safety audits through the life cycle of a project. So I hope you'll look at those. We have a lot of prompt lists, from pedestrians and bicyclists to looking at motorcycle RSAs or transit RSAs. So I know Shemai Nago is on the webinar today, and she was actually very instrumental in working with our program to develop the Road Safety Audit Toolkit for federal land management agencies. And it has been used quite a bit with our partners. So again, please take a look at our website, because we have a lot of these documents. And Tamara, if you can go to that next slide, this is what you're going to see. And, I get asked a lot of questions about road safety audits pretty much on a daily basis. I will get an email from either a private citizen or from a locality wanting to know, where do I get training, or where do I learn more about how to become an auditor? I mean, I've even gotten numerous contacts from other countries wanting to know. So we do have a training through NHI. So if you are interested in learning more about that 8-step process, you saw the little kind of wiggly worm from Tamara and Rachel. I encourage you all to take a look at that NHI course and sign up for that. There are also a number of prompts when you're actually out, on the site wanting to do an RSA that we have developed. So I encourage you all to look at those also. So with that, I think you're going to learn a little bit more about some state road safety audits. So Dan, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Becky, Tamara, and Rachel for kicking us off there. Let's go ahead and shift gears here. We're going to go from big picture international to national level, and now we're going to hear from 2 other states who have some experience working in these areas. And so we're going to go to Tennessee next. Brandon Darks, if you're ready to go ahead and pull up your slides, we'll get into your story. And this is a reminder as we get Brandon to pull up his slides that we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So don't forget to submit your questions as you have them in our Q&A pod. Brandon, have we still got you? You're on mute if you're, yep.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't see your slides yet though.
What about now?
I don't have them yet. Oh, here they come. Great. You're all set, Brandon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on this evening. Gonna be discussing today the road safety audit program in Tennessee, and then also where Tennessee's at with the safe system approach. So where is Tennessee with the safe system approach? Over the years, I feel we've evolved with it, bits and pieces. The actual introduction to TDOT executives by FHWA was in May of 2022. Since then, we're putting emphasis on it, and as we move forward with our strategic highway safety plan update, we'll be looking at achieving, the 5 core elements of safe system. Primarily, the TDOT standpoint, the safe roads, the safe speed, obviously, are stuff that we can look at within our RSA program, but working with our safety partners through the strategic highway safety plan to achieve the other 3 elements moving forward. So this slide kind of shows the main things that TDOT has implemented. Basically, since 2012, Tennessee was identified as a roadway departure state for emphasis for safety. That led us into our first systemic program with our roadway departure action plan. The wider edge lines, the rumbles, whether in the shoulder or the edge line, something that these are adopted and used every time with HSIP and road safety audit implementation. Going into the intersections, this was another area where Tennessee was identified as an emphasis area. So we implemented a statewide systemic low-cost countermeasures. It stop controlled intersections. It's very successful. All of the countermeasures that we learned through the systemic program is now utilized within the RSA programs that I'll be talking about in detail. Same with the back plates, worked with our local stakeholders and utility companies on getting these back plates and getting them to retrofit to existing signal systems. And then, of course, the pedestrian, bicycle, as Tennessee, along with most other states, I think it's seen a lot of uptick with the vulnerable road user and pedestrian fatalities. So this has become an emphasis. So innovative design, the J-turn, the roundabout, these are things that most states are familiar with, but these have been a big success in the rural areas, especially. It comes with a education component and buy-in from your stakeholders, but these are 2 innovative designs that have been successful within our RSA programs. The speed management, energy distribution, these are things that we're going to be working with moving forward, especially with our work zones. This is going to be an emphasis in our strategic highway safety plan update. The managing speeds, although we manage and control a lot of facilities in Tennessee, a lot of the speeds are left to the locals. And then you got the enforcement aspect. But, there again, with the strategic highway safety plan, we're hoping to make big strides with that. The vulnerable road users, this was one of the targets that we missed from our safety performance targets. So VRU, along with the uptick in the fatals and serious injuries of the bike and pedestrians in Tennessee statewide. We're looking at implementing everything we're learning, and especially through safe systems for the bike ped. Our multimodal division is doing real well with this. I have a pedestrian safety initiative I'm going to be talking about in more detail when I get into the road safety audits. But design, more modern innovations, these are things we hope to move forward with. So I mentioned the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. That is our guidance for our HSIP program and also our road safety audit program. This is a slide that shows how the Strategic Highway Safety Plan for Tennessee fits with the safe system element with our emphasis areas. Crash data and analysis, that's where all good projects and programs start with good data. So that's a big importance for us. Infrastructure improvements, operations, vulnerable road users, as I've mentioned, and then you got your commercial vehicles and driver behavior. Our partners at Department of Safety and then our federal motor carriers, we work with them to achieve our goals in our Strategic Highway Safety Plan. So I mentioned HSIP. That is what funds the Road Safety Audit Program at TDOT. That's our primary funding source. It works hand in hand with our Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And then, of course, all the programs that I'll be discussing today are all data-driven and have specific qualifying criteria for whichever safety program that we look to implement. So safety data, I've been doing safety projects for a long time. In the days of paper crash data are over, luckily. So things becoming electronic have just drastically increased the data that we all have available to us. So TDOT, we have a safety data section, which is located in the project safety office, where the RSAs are housed. They're responsible for producing the HSIP annual report. But you also have to have a data housing system. So at TDOT, we have eTrims. It houses all of our roadway data elements, which is crucial to any RSA. One of the things we're real excited about, in the past year and a half, we've implemented the AASHTO SafetyWare, which is biometric. This is going to let us do more strenuous crash analysis and hopefully lead to network screening in the near future. We're currently in the early phases of it, and we've got training ongoing currently. So you got the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. It leads into the roadway safety audit or the safety initiative. So it all starts with your data. So you have to identify a location, collect and process the crash data. Then it leads us into our need, the emphasis area for what we need to focus on when we're putting our multidisciplinary team together, as Rachel mentioned. And on that note, Tennessee looks at the definition of a road safety audit, as Rachel described for Caltrans. So then we get into create the approach that we're going to do. So are we going to look at this as a systemic program? Is this going to be a site-specific type of road safety audit? And then also, who do we need on our team? So we're talking about taking the safe systems approach. You see this last rectangle to the right here talks about the 4 E's, because over the years, that's the way safety was derived. So I'm hoping to have this slide updated in the next year or so as we get safe systems and bring in the 5 full elements. So TDOT's process, after we've got a location that's eligible and meets the criteria, we're going to set a pre-brief meeting. This is where our multidisciplinary team from multiple divisions within TDOT, local stakeholders, whether it's in a MPO, TPO area, or in a rural city, we're going to have stakeholders involved. This is where we're going to talk about the type of audit we're going to do, whether intersection or corridor, introduce the crash rates, the crash diagrams for the pre-brief. Then a site visit's going to be scheduled. We're going to go through our RSA checklist, our photo inventory, and individual recommendations are made, and then our team will come back and compile what we recommend. Then we are going to produce an RSA packet that's going to have guidance figures, cost estimates, and a detailed review of the report, whether it be a no plans, which is what TDOT would consider a signs and lines safety project within existing right-of-way, or is it going to be a big design road safety audit where you're going to have impacts to utility, right-of-way, and design process in place. So then I'm got a showing the ramp queue, spot safety, wrong way initiative, local road safety initiative, pedestrian initiatives. These are all types of RSAs, and I'm going to talk about it. So our local road safety initiative, this is targeted towards our rural major and rural minor arterials. These are county-owned roads. This is a program that TDOT put in place to assist the locals with the rural fatalities on their routes. We provide the locals with the routes that meet the criteria, and then we would set up an audit, typically within the existing right-of-way, signs, pavement markings, snow plowable pavement markings, guardrail where the crash data shows it, and the upgrade of guardrail, and even delineation of guardrail. This program has been around since 2012 and is eligible for 82 of the 95 counties in Tennessee. Then we have the ramp queue program. This is an RSA that's, steered towards what it's showing here. You have a ramp on a controlled access facility or interstate that's queuing back up on the main line. So we would put an RSA team together with design staff from TDOT and local stakeholders and produce an RSA that's steered towards the ramp queue and the countermeasures to address the queue. A wrong way safety initiative, another RSA program. Wrong way crashes are very serious and, constantly on the media. So we have looked at low cost ways of doing this, meaning signs and lines, bidirectional countermeasures. We're also piloting a program with automated lights and signs in the urban areas that if a wrong way move is recognized, it will report back to our transportation management centers. So this is in the early phases now. And then also we've looked at interchange designs where you have a partial clover leaf or an old jug handle design. We've looked at reducing conflict points at those type of interchanges to steer clear from the wrong way move. I talked about the importance in the VRU earlier, our pedestrian safety initiative. This is our RSA programs that are geared specifically towards the bike pedestrian. This has strenuous data. Our multimodal division is heading this up. And, you know, anything pedestrian related that HSIP would cover is something that we would consider as a countermeasure for these types of RSAs. TDOT, we have 2 types of delivery methods for projects. So I mentioned earlier a no plans contract. These are projects that would call for improvements that require no right of way or impacts to utility. And then we have our design RSAs that would involve earthwork, signalization. You know, you're going to be making impacts to somebody outside of property that the department doesn't control. Project schedules, our project safety office, we request all phases of funding for the RSAs. From start to finish, we manage these RSAs through the environmental document phase, through programming, then ultimately led to construction. This is a snapshot of a typical year of funding for the Project Safety Office and our RSA program. We receive roughly $60 million annually, with the 9.8 this million set aside for the VRU, and then roughly 5.5 million for the local road safety initiative. Just a quick snapshot. Over the past 5 years, TDOT spent let to contract $240 million at almost 300 projects. And we're about a 60-40. So 40% of our projects would be of the systemic nature. And I'm looking forward to some of the questions that you all might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon. Really appreciate it. Nice look at what you're doing there in Tennessee. So appreciate hearing that. We're going to go down to Massachusetts. Anna Phil is here to share their story, and then we'll have a time for Q&A and discussion afterwards. So Anna, when you're ready, you can go ahead and pull your slides up. Looks good. Great.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay. All right. So, good afternoon, everybody from Massachusetts. As Dan said, I'm Anna, and one of the many hats I wear on my work at Mass DOT is being the road safety audit supervisor. And I'm really excited to share with you a little about our RSA process here today. So I want to start with, why do we do RSAs? And I know we heard some of the whys already from Rachel, and also probably on the other parts of this webinar series, but I think it's really important to revisit, because we need to know why in order to get in both internally and externally. So we want to know, we want to have folks know and understand why RSAs are such an important component in making our roadways safer, which is everyone's ultimate goal. So as we saw already, RSAs are an FHWA proven safety countermeasure, and it has an expected reduction in crashes between 10 and 60%. And the reason is it allows for safer design. RSAs also help politicians and decision makers clarify and understand safety issues at particular locations, and then it helps them prioritizing projects. So I'll discuss our process for initiating RSAs next, But I just wanted to mention here that many RSAs that we do are the result of politicians and decision makers reaching out to us to request that an RSA be done because of safety concerns. And this really warms my heart because it just shows that the value of RSAs has been broadly disseminated in our state at this point. RSAs also strengthen connections between participants. I think this might be my favorite part of the RSAs, is being able to talk with everyone involved and understand new perspectives, insights, and even frustrations of everybody. And as Rachel mentioned, we in Massachusetts do keep our RSAs to technical people only, so we do not open it for the public, but we do have a multidisciplinary team that involves municipalities, regional planning agencies, walking and bicycle groups, engineers from the districts and from headquarters for DOT, federal highway. So we do have a large stakeholder group, excuse me, that participates. And so it's great because these interactions allow us to not only determine better recommendations for the locations being addressed at the RSA, but they also help us bring back innovative ideas and see where we might be having a disconnect or misunderstanding with other stakeholders. So an example is that at recent RSAs, while we were talking with local police, we're able to introduce them to our crash portal system, that Impact, and see that although this crash system has been rolled out for a while, some police departments still may not know about it. So, you know, we can reach out some more and make sure they are aware that this exists. And the chief of police was so happy to find out about this tool that would help his department with a crash analysis. Finally, RSAs help integrate safety improvements into all projects. Here in Massachusetts, RSAs are considered for every project, even those that are not using HCIP funds. At the onset of a project, a scoping checklist, which is shown here on the left, is filled that includes all disciplines relevant for a project, and they include right-of-way, environmental, utilities, but one of the sections that's being filled is specifically safety related, and one of the check boxes is whether an RSA is required. So although we heard that RSAs can be conducted at all stages of a project and perhaps should be conducted at all stages of a project, here in Massachusetts, we found that they are particularly relevant to include prior to the 25% design. We felt that this reduces the cost of a project by identifying safety issues early on, and also reduces resistance to incorporate the safety improvements, since the project managers can be a little resistant to make significant changes in design once the 25% plans are submitted. And we can understand that because that could impact cost and design, and sometimes it would even require reevaluation of whether the project would be funded. So when RSA is required in Massachusetts? So Mass DOT requires that an RSA be conducted at any project that has a high crash location in the study area, particularly if HCIP funding will be used, but even if not, they're still required for projects that will be funded by Mass DOT. Additionally, private developments that have to undergo our Massachusetts Environmental Planning Act, MEPA, process also need to conduct RSAs if high crash locations are present. And we define high crash locations as intersections and segments that are in the top 5% of the region and can be based on high crash occurrences of vehicles, pedestrians, or bicycles. We also weigh fatal and injury crashes higher than property damage only crashes, and that's in line with our Vision Zero goal of zero roadway fatalities and serious injuries in the Commonwealth. So while for now we only require RSAs for high crash locations, Mass DOT has identified high risk locations for all our strategic highway safety plan emphasis areas, which include pedestrian and bicycles. And we use that information to suggest RSAs be conducted at locations, even if they're not required, if they are at high risk. Additionally, as previously mentioned, many of the RSAs are conducted when they're not technically required. So Mass DOT is willing to help with RSAs whenever asked by municipalities, planning agencies, elected officials, and others. And as I already said, we're very happy that as the program evolved, the benefits of RSAs have been widely recognized, and it's often the first step in addressing safety concerns. Okay. So I just want to show this quick slide. It shows our road safety audit map. So as we complete RSAs, we put them online in this map, like so they're geolocated. So anybody in the state or out of state, if they want to, can access the reports, can see what if an RSA has been done at a certain place, and can then look at any of the recommendations and include it at their planning. So as a brief history, MassDOT has been interested in RSAs for a long time, so almost 20 years. In 2004, 2 RSAs were done as part of a training program with Federal Highway. And by 2007, we performed our first RSA. So understanding the importance of RSAs as a tool to reduce or eliminate crashes, RSAs became a required step in receiving SIP funding. When we completed our 2013 Strategic Highway Safety Plan, RSAs were included as one of the main strategic programs to improve roadway safety. To date, we have conducted more than 650 RSAs across the state, and we average between 60 and 80 RSAs per year. We have also recently completed our 2023 SHSP, which had as a framework both Vision Zero and the Safe System approach. And as you probably guessed too, RSAs are one of the SHSP initiatives. So the 2023 Massachusetts SHSP has 6 initiatives, and one of them is to double down on what works. And hopefully what I said so far has convinced you about the benefits of RSAs, and not just me, but others here. But we thankfully convinced ourselves and stakeholders in the state about the importance of the RSAs. So clearly RSAs are one of our strategies proving to be effective to date, and we want to not only continue to increase the use of RSAs, of the RSA program, but to emphasize it, particularly in areas where equity concerns are present. We're also working to continue to improve and enhance our RSA program. So what are some of the initiatives we're looking into to enhance the Massachusetts RSA program? So first, we're working to update our RSA guidance document. So our current one is from 2015, and although a lot of it is still valid and relevant, we want to include newer guidance, newer initiatives, and a lot has happened since 2015. So some of the points of what we are hoping to add to the document and the process overall include, and just to mention, like here's our link to our road safety audit page, if anybody's interested to take a deeper dive. So as of now, we have a summary table at the end of our reports that include all the recommended countermeasures along with their cost, time frame, jurisdiction, and what we call safety payoff. And the safety payoff is meant to give an understanding of how effective a countermeasure is in reducing crashes. So except for jurisdiction, of course, we use low, medium, and high as measures of like cost, time, and safety payoff. But while we have tables providing guidance for both cost and time frame, and by the way, we also are looking to update these values in this table, since we all know that what we could build in 2015 for whatever amount of dollars we can't anymore. We would also like to do the same to the safety payoff. So we're hoping to include CMFs will help provide the objective comparison of the effectiveness of a safety measure. So as I mentioned before, Massachusetts has adopted the Safe System approach to improve safety on our roadways. And since this is a very new framework, we're still working on how to incorporate and evaluate countermeasures through a Safe System approach lens. We feel that the majority of our RSAs already make use of the Safe System approach principles. However, we're hoping to be able to incorporate SSA more explicitly in our RSA process. So if anyone has any ideas and suggestions, please send them our way. The study is already a huge help. And as was mentioned earlier, there's also 2 NCHRP panels dealing with road safety audits. DOT practice to road safety audits and incorporating the Safe System approach into roadway safety audits. So we are eagerly awaiting the results of these 2 panels so that we can incorporate their findings and improve our own process, as well as incorporate SSA into it. Finally, sometimes RSAs are requested without having a specific project tied to it. So as a state, we're always willing to help and at the risk of repeating myself too much, happy, one of the first thoughts in people's minds when confronted with a safety issue is to conduct an RSA. On the other hand, we don't want to have an RSA done and then just have the report sit on a shelf. So the goal is to implement the countermeasures recommended. So to address this concern, Massachusetts created a program where low-cost system improvements that were identified on an RSA can be implemented in the interim until a more comprehensive project can be funded and built if needed. So sometimes a short-term, low-cost project can be sufficient to correct the issues at the location, and that would be great. But if not, then we would like to try to initiate a program about it. So this program has just started, so we're evaluating how well it works and if any tweaks might be necessary. So now I just want to go briefly a few projects that incorporated our RSA findings. And so I have some before and after photos. So remember how I just said that sometimes a low cost short-term enhancement can work wonders. So here in this case, we added flexible delineator posts to help better delineate the intersection and enforce movement prohibitions. Another example is a project that was a little bit more involved and included signalizing a stop control intersection. The project also added turn lanes. It added both pedestrian and bicycle accommodations and improved signage. So this was like a whole thing. At this location, we had observed a high number of angle crashes and somewhat high speeds, poor sight distance. So after the RSA, a project was created to convert the stop controlled intersection into a roundabout. So I would like to conclude with some lessons we learned from our RSA journey. So although we may encounter some resistance to doing an RSA at the beginning, once the process is concluded, almost always everyone involved is happy to have participated. After almost 15 years, we have both municipalities and planning agencies now conducting their own led RSAs. Sometimes it's challenging to have people moving from the it can be done here or it can be done as part of this project attitudes. But the facilitators are able to educate participants that RSAs look at all possible safety enhancements so that they can be considered either as part of the current project or also part of a potential bigger project in the future that could have like more scope or budget. So in fact, an RSA can be used as a guide to determine if projects should be initiated at particular locations. When suggesting recommendations, participants should be encouraged to think broadly and consider factors beyond roadway design for automobiles. So for a long time, at least here in Massachusetts, a lot of emphasis was put on getting from point A to point B the fastest way possible. And as we changed our thinking to include all modes of transportation, as well as the safe system approach principles in our design, we need to emphasize that safety countermeasures involve accounting for more than just traditional improvements, but also including human factors, adequately accommodating all users safely on our roadways, use of technology, etc. So building on the previous point, we need to incorporate not only engineering, but also education, emergency response, and other countermeasures in our thinking. So for instance, we found out that some areas of our state does not have cell reception. And that was, an important factor to know because that can cost lives. So looking at how emergency responders can find out and react quickly to crashes is an important component to safety as well. So having an RSA done, which has a specific list of recommended safety countermeasures, helps or sometimes forces designers to incorporate them in their projects. So I'm not gonna lie, in the beginning, we did experience pushback and still do sometimes, but now that the RSA process is established, more often than not, safety is considered without a second thought, which is really great because our goal is to truly integrate safety into all we do and all our projects. So thank you for allowing me to share the Massachusetts RSA process with you. And do not hesitate to contact me at the email with screen with questions, suggestions, ideas. We are happy to hear from you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anna. And to the rest of our panel, if we can bring everyone back, we'll shift into our discussion period now. We did get a lot of really great questions, so thank you all for sending those in. I'll go through, we'll try to handle as many as we have time for. Becky, I actually wanted to start with you, if that's all right. There were several questions, and a lot of us on our slides referenced that RSA evaluation report that you can find on the Federal Highway Administration website, among other things, showing a potential reduction in expected crashes after doing these sorts of activities. There's a range there. I think we saw the 10 to 60% reduction. And so I wondered if you might talk to us a little bit about as I understand it, the range reflects a range of different ways an RSA can be done and the types of projects that might come out of it. Can you say any more about what that figure might reference, and does that capture the effectiveness of the countermeasures that are then selected from the RSA team to be implemented? If you could speak to that report a little bit.
It's not easy. Okay, let's just say that, Dan,
Sure.
right off the start. So what we did is we looked at several different RSAs. We looked at the different countermeasures, and as you all have heard, depending on the project, depending on the team, depending on really the context, you're going to get different outcomes, right? So I think it was 3 different, this has been, gosh, I think about a decade ago. We looked at 3 different RSAs, and we looked at what the team recommended. And then we looked at what was actually done as a result of the RSA. And then that is how we came up with the crash modification factor, if you will, for those particular RSAs. So that's why we have such a big range. It seems odd, but it was really based on those individual RSAs. And, I've been on RSAs where we were literally walking the roadway, and someone says, hey, we need to correct that sign. We need to cut that brush back. We need to make sure that this is done. And it's instantly done. And then you may have other recommendations that are going to take longer over several years. So, but that's what we tried to do when we tried to evaluate each one of those in the case study document to come up with that range of benefit.
Yeah, great. Thank you for clarifying that. That's a great report too. If anyone, I sent the link to that page out, and you can find it from there. It's a really useful way to kind of see how you can measure the outcomes of an RSA in a really systematic way. So it's nice to have that on hand.
And I'd love to see folks' RSA documents. We love to post those on our website. So please forward those if you have them, just so other folks can kind of see the teams that you've put together and the locations and recommendations. That would be great.
Great. Thanks, Becky. Getting back to sort of the spirit of the webinar series, learning from Australia, New Zealand, and our friends down there. We're talking about RSAs, and I'm curious to know, because it seems like from the presentations, RSAs have been around here for quite a while. We've been doing this process. What would you say, how would you describe the biggest differences in how the RSA process looks in Australasia compared to how it's done in the United States? Tamara, I don't know if you're the best person to maybe start that one out, and then others can jump in who are involved in the study tour.
Yeah, I think it has to do with safety very much being the focus there for years. It's been a priority, and I won't say it's not been a priority in the United States, but I think we just approach things differently. And also, I think it's a difference in the size of the countries. New Zealand, is much smaller. Australia is about the same size, but it has I think 10% of the population. So not as many roadways. I think it's easier for them to integrate and come on board and get people invested in certain safety features and ideas than is here in the United States. I think it's due to the size of the population and all the states that we have. It's very difficult to come to a consensus, I think, on what a road safety audit program would look like. Or a safety program in general. So.
Okay. Great. Any other thoughts from those who participated in the scan of major differences in how the RSA looks outside of the U.S. From the countries that were examined?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of what Tamara mentioned, to me, like the two major differences, the first being that the RSAs undertaken in Australasia are done by someone independent of the project. So not involved at all, fresh set of eyes, and that they're trained. And so they have like deep expertise in road safety, and they're able then to be able to come in and recommend improvements based on their expertise, not based on the involvement that they've had in the project. And I think that really is distinctly different than the process that many states use here in the States. It being almost a stakeholder engagement activity. And no doubt that's incredibly important, getting input from communities. But I think what we saw is that RSAs really served a very distinct purpose of looking at the technical, and there were other like very extensive community engagement activities that were undertaken, but RSAs are really very focused on safety countermeasures, and done by a very small group, so 3 to 4 people at the most.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I want to come back to some team makeup, audit team composition in a moment, but it strikes me on some of your presentations and remarks that the systematic nature of the RSA is maybe what separates it or differentiates it from at least what I'm familiar with and our audience is familiar with here in the US, because there were a lot of questions about how do you go from doing RSAs as an as needed basis, or occasionally we'll do an RSA when we're asked to doing it systematically at every single point in every single project. What does that shift look like? And I wanted to see if Brandon and Anna might be able to speak about how that has become more systematic for your agencies. Where does it get built into the process to ensure that it isn't a step that is skipped, when it's convenient or when there may not be time or people?
Yeah, I can go first. So at DOT here, at Mass DOT, it's kind of one of our focus. It's deemed very important. So at the beginning, it took some convincing, for people to buy into the process. But at this point, it has been institutionalized, and so as I mentioned a little bit in the presentation, we do have this project scoping checklist it kind of determines the scope of a project. So it's done before anything else is done, and then in there it's already tells the designers what they need to do. So it talks about all the disciplines, but as pertinent to safety, it talks about is this a top 5% location? If it is, does it need an RSA? So we catch it really early on that that they need to do it, so then they're able to put it on their budget, put it on their schedule. And we feel that having that done that early reduces confusion and reduces people not wanting to do it, because it's already baked into the budget and into the process. So if we didn't catch it early, that's when people get upset. There are times when it's not caught early, and then we get some pushback. But like having that done early on, it's helpful.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that pushback. It's another topic I wanted to get to. We just received a comment from someone listening in, and they have years ago tried to, they got funding and they got people to do the RSAs. It sounds like when they got to the point of wanting to do them, the attitude was, we know how to build roads and don't need anybody looking over our shoulder to tell us how. And this person asks, have we come far since then? It sounds like we have in your locations, in your states. And Brandon, you didn't get a chance to respond to that prior question, but did you had you received pushback on this process from anyone in trying to get this work done? Has it been a process to get to the point where this is an accepted procedure that you undergo now?
Well, at TDOT, we conducted our first RSA in 2005. So we've had, a lot of practice to get to where we are. But in May of 2010, it became institutionalized at TDOT when our safety office was created. We got the HSIP component. We set a 3 and 5 year budget plan for our RSA program. And everything I mentioned today is funded through HSIP. So yes, there's been growing pains, especially with doing local road audits, maintenance agreements with the local stakeholders. And then safety is not a buy-in for TDOT. Safety is important across the board, but getting other divisions that already have or that might be understaffed to be one of your team members, you know, we might have had some problems there. Getting first responders involved has been real big the last couple of years. We've seen an uptick in that. So we're seeing some headway, but now it's just normal process. I mean, we've got system in place for every RSA we do. We have guidance for every type of RSA we do, and we have a manual for every type of RSA. And it, you know, once you get it going and people see the effectiveness and how important it is, it's not hard to get buy-in.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, it does seem like the kind of thing that you do it a few times and you get more comfortable. It's not the scariest thing in the world, it sounds like. So that's really good to hear. I wanted to get back to what we learned from Australasia, and maybe Tamara or Rachel can jump in on this one. There were quite a few questions about cost-related aspects of the RSA, and the questions come up a few times. Are the folks in Australia and New Zealand hiring outside help to come in to lead these audit teams, or are these comprised of members of the agency, but maybe not the project designers? It sounds like they are truly independent from who is working on the project, but could you elaborate on whether these are consultants that are brought in and covered for their time and things like that for these audits, or is it a cost that it's just simply staff time for the agency?
Yeah, I think as I recall, this was something that they took on like with in-house. So I don't know if consultant help maybe, you know, helps augment staff time sometimes, but my understanding is that it is, I mean, there's a huge body of people who are auditors, and that this is, you know, that this is something that many have been trained on, that it's not consulted out. But Tamara, if your recollection is different, please chime in.
No, I mean, that's exactly what I believe. You know, I don't recall them talking about consultants. I kind of think everybody is somewhat trained in safety. Like I said, it's kind of preeminent above everything else. So I don't recall them talking about consultants. Seems like, you know, it came from staff.
Yeah, and I think one of the really interesting things that I took away from our discussions there was that, you know, there's a lot of respect for these auditors. So anytime that a recommendation is made coming out of an RSA, the auditor will give their recommendation to the project team, and there's no requirement that their recommendations get taken, but there's so much sort of like built-in respect for these auditors based on their knowledge and expertise that the recommendations, I remember the folks at Wikikatahi telling us that they're almost always taken. So the improvements that are recommended. And I think that just gets at sort of that, the understanding that a large group has in road safety. So everybody seems to be trained on road safety. So it's not this sort of like push and pull, like, what are we going to fund? It's everybody realizes that road safety is really critical. And so these auditors make recommendations and then they're usually included.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It sounds, there was a comment earlier, someone asked or compared, I guess, the process for road building to something like developing or building a private building or something like that. And in terms of in the US, without the audit process in place, we sort of self-certify that the roads that we're building are safe. Yet when buildings are built, there are codes that must be met. Inspectors come in to make sure that those were adhered to. Do you see the audit process being a similar process to that, a truly independent group coming in to look at in systematic way, these are the things we needed to do with this project, were they all done, as a way to maybe shift toward that, less of a self-certification and more of a independent stamp of approval, we have done what we need to do?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think it's really important, and one of the messages that I think was really clear abroad is that designing to standards and guidance doesn't guarantee safety. So maybe when you're designing a building, of which I, although I'm an engineer, do not know how to design a building, I think that there are sort of those codes and standards that would, make sure your building is structurally, sufficient. But I think when it comes to safety, standards and guidance and codes are critically important, but they're a good starting point. And so designing to them is no doubt important, but it doesn't necessarily mean then that the road is safe or is risk-free. So, I think sometimes when we talk about safety, the complexity of the environment and the design and competing, sometimes there can be competing design standards, can all mean that even if you follow them, it doesn't necessarily mean that something is inherently safe. So, I think it's important that we all as professionals keep that in mind, because rarely, I think when we talk about road safety is something so black and white as, safe, not safe, as it may be in the building industry. I think what we need to keep in mind is that there's sort of like attributes of the safest roads. And those are the things, those concepts are what we need to have trained auditors, for example, that really understand, so that they can apply those concepts into the specific project example or the specific project that's in front of them.
Interesting. Yeah, and some of the other panelists have shared some links to the safe system assessment framework that's used by Austroads that I think does a great job in laying out these principles of what a safe system is that can then be used to perform these assessments broadly, and then getting to the really nitty-gritty specifics that you encounter in the field. And so one of the things I wanted to shift to is the process of the audit itself. And if Anna and Brandon can elaborate on this from your perspectives, the value of a prompt or a set of prompts to take with you into the field to look specifically at certain items that may otherwise be missed. Can you speak to the value of that? Or is that the kind of tool that you use when you do your road safety audits? Are these set prompts for making sure that we document X, Y, and Z? Or are they more, do they allow for more open, free-form sort of observation, or is there a blend in between those two? I'd be curious to hear how the approach looks on the ground.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. I mentioned we start with a pre-brief. So we have a little understanding of what we're getting into, especially with aerial photography, meeting with our regional and district folks at the pre-brief. So we have a lot more information today than we did in 2005, but we have a checklist, whether it's a corridor, we're going to have a corridor checklist, and it pretty much has everything, because a corridor have intersections, could be signalized, could be stop controlled. But, if it's one of our specific programs, like a ramp queue, we have a ramp queue checklist that talks about, is there a shoulder there? How far is the queue? We've already done analysis that'll show if we have to lengthen the shoulder or lengthen the ramp, how far we have to go. So we're already looking at impacts in the field that we can take back to design to hopefully speed up the process. We try to have our RSAs on the ground within 24 months from the time we get a signed report. So yeah, but every year's gotten better. We've come up with other things to use in the field, what other states have done. But yes, the more you know before you get out there, and if you have a local stakeholder there with local knowledge that maybe can just trim the vegetation or pull some signs back that maybe would take us months to take care of, because we don't control the facility. A lot of the steps are up to our partners. So, and we've built good relationships. That's what it takes.
Yeah, so Massachusetts, we do kind of a similar, we do a hybrid. So before any RSA, we send a package and it has, you know, crash data, and it does have a prompt list, so of items to think about. And we don't, at the beginning, we followed it more strictly, but at this point, we just let it be a little bit more free flow. We do have a facilitator that facilitates the RSA, you know, and although they're not like certified or trained, you know, they're people that do this often, so they guide the conversation if there's, you know, items that should be considered. But we try to get, you know, we do use a lot of the multidisciplinary team part that's like, you know, part of the definition of the RSA. And so we always have police, we always have fire, we have, you know, the municipalities represented, we have, you know, bike ped people, so all areas, so we can try to get their experience, because they, you know, they live it every, like, you know, we know it from a technical perspective and we can see the data, but, you know, these people drive the location every day, so they notice things that sometimes might not be shown necessarily in the data. And similarly, we do have a pre-meeting, you know, we all meet together, we discuss the location, and then we go as a group to the field and observe it, and then we go back and do sort of a post-meeting where then we talk additional observations and whether, and then go over countermeasures. So that's how where we landed.
Thank you for that. I'll finish with this question. I'd love to get as many responses to this one as I could, if we can go around the room maybe. We got a comment saying that, especially if you haven't done it before or less familiar, road safety audits can seem pretty daunting to take on. Do you have recommendations, or have you seen successes in simplifying this approach, or making it seem less daunting, or providing more of a nice entry point for agencies or individuals who haven't quite gotten this off the ground yet? And I wonder, Becky and Tamara, you got a nice national and now international view of this. Do you have recommendations? And then we can kind of filter down to some of our statewide friends.
Becky and I kind of talked about that the other day, and she had some good answers, I thought.
Well, I would just start small. You know, if you know you have a location in your locality, maybe an intersection, maybe you know, a mile corridor, maybe smaller than that. You know, get a team, get your multidisciplinary team. I always want to have law enforcement on my team, because they are out there riding the roads and they see what's going on. So you definitely want to have that multidisciplinary team. I don't, you know, some people go a little bit crazy with the data. It's fine. You know, it's great to have a lot of data so that you can see, but you know, it's feet on the ground. You want to walk the site. You want to see it at rush hour. You want to see it at night. You know, you want to see it 2 days in a row. To me, that is just so important, is to actually get out there and see what's going on, that fresh set of eyes. That's my recommendation.
Thank you. Tamara, unless you have any, we may ask, let's ask Rachel and Brandon, and then Anna from California, Tennessee, and Massachusetts.
Yeah. So I think Becky's point is spot on. Start small, start as a pilot. We actually here at Caltrans, we had a safety review process that was already embedded into our project delivery side of the house. So we undertook sort of a deep analysis of what currently occurs in that safety review process, and then we're trying to just like sort of modify it a bit so that it fits more of what we want in a, you know, sort of traditional RSA, what we've seen, you know, abroad. And then our plan is to extend it out to other project lifecycle phases. So maybe that's somewhere to start. Also, the idea of just choosing a project, and maybe you do start with post-construction, you know, just to get people sort of in the mindset of what you want it to be, I'd say is, you know, probably a good starting point.
Yeah, Brandon?
I definitely agree with Rachel and Becky, starting small. in getting your process defined of who you need as your team. And what I mean by need is you need them for every audit. You know, they're going to be involved with, no matter you do a big design audit or whatever program, you know, you're going to have your key stakeholders at every one. And also to keep in mind the impacts 3 and 5 years down the road to your maintenance divisions and your regional forces who are trying to keep these safety audits where you've got them implemented looking beautiful, as I like to say, or staying safe. You know, it's stuff that you don't necessarily think of on the front end, but it has a big impact on the back end. But starting small, if you can make make the program fit your department, when you go big, it's just more money, a larger report, more data, and more team members. But the process should still work the same.
Right. Thanks, Brandon. Anna, any final words of wisdom for us?
Yeah, no, I agree with everybody in the sense of, like, you know, starting small, getting pilots going. I think, yeah, you know, try to find a friendly location, maybe, you know, a place where you have a town that's interested and wants to learn and wants to be part of the process. So, you know, it's always easier when, you know, you have willing partners. You know, let people know that you're here to help. You can help them, you know, get things going. And so yeah, so like that.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for your comments, your presentations today, sharing what you've done in this area and helping us all learn about how we can do it differently. We are going to be back for one more episode in this series, November 7th. We hope you'll join us. There's information on our website. We'll email the link about how you can sign up for that one. We're going to send out a follow-up email that also has instructions for getting your certificate of attendance for this webinar. So stay tuned for that. I just want to say thanks again to our panel. Thanks to you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.